The first light of dawn spilled softly across the airport, casting long, pale shadows on the tarmac. Inside the terminal, the air was hushed and crisp, untouched by the usual hum of daytime travel. At gate 37, a solitary figure stood with quiet poise, Ibrahim Traoré. No entourage, no luxury briefcase, no tailored suit. He could have been anyone. A student, a businessman, a father coming home. But he wasn't just anyone. He was the president of Burkina Faso. Traoré moved through the world on his own terms. Modest, unannounced, and always among the people. He had no use for spectacle. Cameras and ceremony were distractions from what mattered. He had just concluded significant diplomatic discussions in Europe, conversations rooted in gold reserves, sovereignty, and the shape of Africa's tomorrow. But now, as he walked toward his Air France flight bound for Ouagadougou, none of that mattered more than getting home. Passing an airport staffer, he smiled and greeted him in warm French. "Bonjour, ça va?" The man smiled back, oblivious to the traveler's true identity, just as Traoré preferred it. He boarded the plane quietly, offering a courteous nod to the crew, and settled into seat 2A by the window in business class. A man of presence, yet invisible to most. But not to everyone. A few rows behind, murmurs began. A French executive, the CEO of a powerful energy firm, was en route to Burkina Faso as well. He was accustomed to extravagance. Private lounges, priority boarding, champagne waiting by his seat. So when the gate agent informed him that business class was full, his polished shoes tapped in protest, his voice tight with disbelief. No was not a word he tolerated. "I am a strategic partner in Africa," he declared with impatient pride. The agent scrambled, brows furrowed over tablets. But facts are hard to bend. Every seat in business was taken. Still, the CEO refused to accept this boundary. That's when the airline dispatched Claire, a senior flight attendant, poised and steely in her Air France uniform. Claire entered the cabin with a deliberate stride, scanning each seat with analytical precision. When her eyes landed on Ibrahim Traoré, seated calmly in 2A, they lingered. No designer luggage, no assistant, no visible signs of power, just a dark-skinned man in a hoodie. Her judgment was swift. She leaned to another attendant and muttered, "Probably a mistake." Then she approached him, her smile taut and performative. "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass?" He handed it over without hesitation. The information checked out. Yet in her mind something didn't. A few minutes later she returned, now with an official tone. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we may need to relocate you to economy class to make room for another passenger. You'll be compensated." The insult, veiled in procedure, landed without a sound. Traoré lifted his head, brow gently arched. "And why me?" "No reason, sir. Just a small adjustment for our guest," she replied, keeping her voice level. "A guest more important than me?" His tone never shifted. Still even, still respectful. Claire didn't answer. She smiled instead. Around them, tension rippled. Nearby passengers began to glance up, sensing the weight of something unsaid. Traoré remained seated, composed. "No," he said simply. "I will remain in my seat." Claire blinked. A refusal from him. On her shift, her authority bruised, she tried again. "Sir, I insist. For operational reasons." "If that's true," he replied, unwavering, "then why not ask someone else?" She hesitated. He was too calm, too centered. Her control of the moment was slipping. A few seats away, passengers began to listen more intently. One lowered his newspaper. Another paused mid-email. The atmosphere had changed. Claire turned and left without a response, whispering with the captain, returning moments later, not to Ibrahim, but to another black man in business class. Then another. Her pattern was unmistakable. Still, Traoré said nothing. His face neutral, but his mind sharp. He was tracking every move, every word. Not with anger, but with focus. Another young African man, possibly in his late 20s, was approached. "You, sir," Claire said, pointing. "We need to move you." "Why me?" he asked. No answer. Just silence and the gesture for his boarding pass. That's when Traoré stood. Enough! His voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. The kind that silences a room. You're making decisions based on skin color, not seat assignments. That's discrimination. Claire stiffened. Sir, please sit down. Don't make a scene. He met her eyes, unwavering, steady. Something in his gaze made her breath catch. There was presence in him, a quiet power she couldn't place. Still, she didn't recognize who he was. Just another passenger causing trouble. She turned away again, fuming. These people, she muttered under her breath in French, always creating drama. At last, the CEO was escorted aboard. Claire greeted him like royalty, offering him champagne, her smile now genuine. We're resolving the seating matter, she told him. Back in 2A, Ibrahim Traoré fastened his seatbelt. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The story had already been written. As the CEO passed, he didn't so much as glance at Traoré. Claire ensured he was pampered, warm towels, adjusted seat, more champagne. The message was unspoken but clear, he mattered. That man did not. The engines roared. The aircraft lifted into the sky, carrying more than passengers. It carried a moment destined to ripple through two nations. Inside, the cabin settled. The seatbelt sign dimmed. Normalcy returned on the surface, but below it, something was simmering. Traoré remained still, his presence quiet but unmistakable. Claire kept her distance, but the memory of his eyes lingered. She didn't understand why, but something about him disturbed her. Midway through the flight, she returned with a false brightness. Would you like anything to drink, sir? He looked at her. Water is fine. She nodded, retreating without apology, courtesy, or care. Meanwhile, the CEO basked in attention. Claire laughed at his comments, leaned in when he spoke. Burkina Faso is lucky, he said with smug certainty, to have us bring order to their chaos. She nodded in agreement, utterly unaware that the man he dismissed was just 2 rows away. Elsewhere in the cabin, a quiet voice broke the silence. An African nurse headed home to Bobo de Lasso leaned to her seatmate and whispered, "That's our president. They don't even know who they're humiliating." Her neighbor's eyes widened, but said nothing. No one wanted to disturb the silence Traoré himself had preserved. Hours passed. Lights dimmed. Most passengers dozed. But not Traoré. He stared out at the clouds, still and patient. Not defeated, waiting. As the wheels touched down in Ouagadougou, the cabin stirred. Lights came on. Seatbelts clicked. Claire walked the aisle once more, clipboard in hand, all smiles, for the CEO. Outside the window, golden light spilled across the red earth. A storm had crossed the sky. Its thunder had not yet come, but it would. As the aircraft descended smoothly toward Ouagadougou, a few passengers stirred from sleep, stretching as the cabin filled with soft light. But what they couldn't see yet was what waited below. A full presidential motorcade already assembled on the tarmac. Rows of black SUVs glinted in the sun, flanked by armored vehicles and elite soldiers in crisp uniform, standing in sharp formation. The sight was impossible to ignore once it came into view. Inside the cabin, whispers ignited. "Are we landing in a war zone?" one foreigner asked, peering nervously out the window. No, another passenger replied. "Probably just protocol. Someone important must be arriving." The French CEO, seated comfortably and confidently, gave a smug chuckle. "Must be for me," he quipped to Claire, who laughed obligingly, already planning to walk him off the aircraft ahead of the others. She had rehearsed the scene in her mind, a dignified escort for a very important man. But the moment the plane touched down and began to taxi, everything shifted. The air turned heavy with tension. From their windows, passengers could now clearly see Burkina Faso's highest officials waiting in the heat: the Minister of Defense, the Foreign Minister, the head of National Security. Each one stood motionless, eyes forward, as if carved from stone. Claire peeked through the window and gasped. What is this?" she whispered. The CEO rose, adjusting his jacket with theatrical flair. "I told you," he beamed. This is for me. Big projects here. But before a single passenger could disembark, a tall officer wearing a black beret boarded the aircraft. His boots struck the floor with purpose as he strode slowly down the aisle, scanning faces. He stopped at seat 2A. He raised his hand to his brow in a crisp salute. Monsieur le President, welcome home. The cabin froze. For a long breath, no one moved. The only sound was the faint whir of the air circulation system. Hearts thudded. Claire's jaw went slack. Her hands shook as she stared between the officer and the man she had dismissed for the entire flight. Slowly, Ibrahim Traoré stood. Calm, composed, his silence louder than any declaration. The CEO stepped back, his voice faltering. President. Traoré looked at him. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a quiet acknowledgement. A simple nod. Then, from the back of the plane, another officer entered. This one didn't hesitate. We have orders, he said, voice like steel. He turned to Claire, then the CEO. You too. You're coming with us. Claire blinked in disbelief. What? Why me? You're being detained for questioning, the officer replied coolly. Public disrespect of a head of state on sovereign soil. A serious offense. Claire stammered, her voice cracking. No, I didn't know. I was just doing my job. No one answered. Ibrahim Traoré descended the steps of the aircraft into a wall of salutes and cheering voices. His ministers embraced him. His people welcomed him. Beyond the fences, crowds had gathered, waving flags, chanting his name. Cameras flashed. The truth was now undeniable. He had walked among them, not as a leader wrapped in ceremony, but as a man, and those who had judged him based on appearance now faced the weight of their choices. On the tarmac, under the blazing Burkinabe sun, Claire and the CEO were marched down the steps in handcuffs. The same passengers who had watched them wield arrogance now watched them humbled, heads lowered, surrounded by silent guards. The silence itself spoke volumes. It was the sound of dignity reasserting itself, the sound of a nation standing tall. The two were placed in separate black vehicles, flanked by elite soldiers. No words were spoken. None were needed. Inside the terminal, President Ibrahim Traoré addressed a small press gathering. He stood tall, voice steady, not bitter, but resolute. In Burkina Faso, he said, we do not judge a man by the color of his skin. We do not kneel to wealth or cling to colonial ghosts. Here we honor dignity, humanity, and our people. That is the Africa we are building. His words spread like wildfire. Within hours, video clips of the arrest surfaced online. Photos of the salutes of the CEO being led away in shame flooded social media. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Respect Africa. Hashtag I Stand with Burkina. Hashtag Traoré les President. Across the continent, African youth celebrated the moment. A symbol of pride, of justice, of a new era. At the Ministry of Justice, Claire and the CEO were charged. Public insult, discrimination, abuse of power, and attempted intimidation against a sitting head of state. The French embassy scrambled, issuing frantic calls and diplomatic requests. But President Traoré's response was crystal clear. This is not a colony. This is a sovereign nation. They will face justice like anyone else. Air France issued a generic corporate apology the next day, sterile and calculated. Fell flat. Across Burkina Faso, calls for a boycott spread. In neighboring countries, solidarity followed. Claire, now in a detention center outside Ouagadougou, broke down in tears during questioning. I didn't know who he was, she cried. I was just following procedures. The investigator's voice was cool and unwavering. You didn't need to know who he was. You only needed to treat him like a human being. The CEO, meanwhile, attempted to pull strings. But Burkina Faso's courts were unmoved. A historic ruling was delivered. No diplomatic immunity. No special status. Equality before the law, no exceptions. President Traoré never gloated. He never mocked or lashed out. He simply returned to his office, back to his work. Building infrastructure, empowering youth, reinforcing national defense. But the story of that flight, of a quiet man in a hoodie, a flight attendant blinded by bias, and a CEO drowning in his own hubris, would echo far beyond that runway. It became legend, and it changed everything.